Joining me now is the Democratic Senator Chris Van Hollen of Maryland. He's a member of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee. He has visited the Rafah border crossing between Gaza and Egypt just a few weeks ago. Senator, thank you for being with us again. We appreciate it. I don't know how many ways to say this. The U.S. government and Israel's government are not seeing eye to eye on how to or whether Israel should end the war, despite being pressed on it by both Secretary Blinken and President Biden this week. Netanyahu gave a news conference on Thursday in which he said, quote, "I will not compromise on full Israeli control over the entire area west of the Jordan, and this is contrary to a Palestinian state," end quote. This is a problem.
Ali, it's a very big problem. You have Prime Minister Netanyahu, again, directly and publicly rebuffing the President of the United States. And this is part of a pattern. The United States has requested repeatedly that the Netanyahu coalition reduce the huge number of civilian casualties in Gaza. They're going up, 2/3 of the dead, women and children. You have a humanitarian catastrophe going from terrible to worse. And you have a prime minister who clearly is not prioritizing the return of the hostages. He is putting his own political skin above the hostages. So it seems to me that it is time that we have a ceasefire, a return of the hostages, and President Biden needs to go big and bold. He needs to put forward that vision of a two-state solution. It is the only way to create some light at the end of this very dark tunnel, to provide the security that will prevent future October 7th, and to provide self-determination and dignity to all the Palestinian people who have nothing to do with Hamas in a state of their own. That needs to be the goal of the United States.
And look, what we continue to hear from the U.S. administration and from the Israelis, and it's not wrong, is that this war could end if Hamas released the hostages. It is a war crime to have taken them and to have done what they did on October 7th. But when you think about prioritizing the hostages, the hostage families and Yair Lapid, who is an opposition leader who's part of the this government, has said, we would support anything, including a ceasefire, if it gets the hostages out. And most Israelis' view is that you deal with Hamas how you need to deal with Hamas at a later point, perhaps, but you can get the hostages out through a negotiated settlement that might involve a ceasefire.
Well, that's exactly right. That's what so many of the hostages' families are saying. That's what people in Israel are saying, which is why I say it is time for the ceasefire and the release of the hostages. And it's very clear that Prime Minister Netanyahu knows that his political days are numbered once this conflict comes to an end. So he does have an incentive to keep it going. He has an incentive to get in this fight, apparently, with the President of the United States of America. Obviously, Netanyahu sees that in his interests, which is why I think President Biden needs to take advantage of the fact that within Israel, President Biden is much more popular than Prime Minister Netanyahu. And we need to the President of the United States needs to put this vision forward to provide this light at the end of the tunnel. President Biden has said we need a two-state solution. Netanyahu has slapped it down. Let's take that argument to people throughout the region. This is really the last chance, the last gasp for a viable two-state
Yeah, there's a weird circumstance in which this tragedy could actually lead to something that has been needed for a long time. But here's the rub. Netanyahu is out there giving speeches about how he's the one who can stand between America and Netanyahu and the Israeli people. And that's a perfectly fine view for a sovereign country to take, except for the fact that Israel is a recipient of a lot of U.S. aid. In November, you wrote a letter to President Biden, signed by 26 other Senate Democrats, who seek more information on how Israel is conducting its war in Gaza. In December, you pursued an amendment that would require any country that received U.S. aid, and there are many, to operate, quote, in accordance with international law, including international humanitarian law and the law of armed conflict. But right before the new year, again, this administration approved more military aid to Israel without congressional approval. What do you do now?
Well, Ali, you're absolutely right. The Biden administration is sending mixed signals. On the one hand, it goes to Israel and says, please reduce the number of civilian casualties. And at the same moment, it uses a procedure to bypass the United States Senate in order to rush more weapons more quickly, including many of the weapons that have this huge impact in terms of more civilians killed. So what I've proposed, along with now up to 18 members of the Senate, my colleagues, is a proposal which, as you say, applies equally to all recipients of U.S. military assistance. It requires that every recipient comply with international humanitarian law. This should not be something controversial. It requires that every recipient cooperates with U.S. efforts to provide humanitarian assistance into conflict zones where U.S. weapons that they purchased are being used. That would apply to Ukraine. It would apply to Israel. And importantly, it requires reporting so that we have transparency and accountability with respect to those first two.
Senator, always good to talk to you. Thank you for taking time for us this morning. Democratic Senator Chris Van Hollen of Maryland.